Well, I guess we're ready. I want to, first of all, thank Steve for that wonderful introduction, and especially for not comparing us to Bonnie and Clyde or Abbott and Costello, which if you'd been at some of those original conversations, you could have easily concluded. I also want to say to Steve and Stefan and all the trustees here and really everyone in the audience who are part of the National Constitution Center extended family, that it is just wonderful to be back here. But even more than that, it's wonderful to be back here without any real responsibilities whatsoever. So if you have any complaints about tonight's program or about the acoustics or about the parking or the accommodation, I can give you Linda Johnson's email at the end of the program, and I urge you to be in touch with her. Most of all, though, it's great to be here, but it's an extraordinary honor and privilege to be here with Rick. Rick really was the intellectual guiding light behind the creation of the exhibits, which, as magnificent as the architecture of this place is, the exhibits are its heart and soul. And over those conversations in his College Hall office over many, many months, the story of We the People really took shape. The unsung hero of that, by the way, was Rick's then dog named Chief Justice John Marshmallow. If you buy and read the book, as Steve urges, and I also urge, you'll see that Abigail Adams is the new plays that role now. But Rick has a heroic intellect, and he has written a really remarkable and compelling and wonderful book. And I'm looking forward to the conversation. I hope you enjoy it, and I hope you enjoy the conversation that you'll have with Rick as you read through those pages. The first question, I think, Rick, is really the dog that didn't bark. Why hasn't there been a book since Catherine Drinker Bowen wrote Miracle at Philadelphia 40 years ago?
42 years ago.
And was she a Philadelphian as well?
43 years ago, she was a Philadelphian. I'm going to answer that question, and I promise this is not going to be a love fest between Bonnie and Clyde or whomever.
Why not?
But I do have to echo what Steve Frank said about Joe and the terrific relationship we have had over the years. And all you need to do is look out that window at that spectacular vista and look at this amazing institution that Joe built. He is the founding father of the Constitution Center, and I do count it as the greatest thrill of my life to be part of it.
Thank you.
So you're going to go easy on me now.
I was going to go easy on you before that. Now it's going to be.
40-some years have elapsed since there was a full narrative history of the Constitutional Convention. I think that time has elapsed because Catherine Drinker Bowen's book was a really terrific book. In fact, I was first inspired to love the Constitutional Convention by reading an earlier book by Carl Van Doren, The Great Rehearsal, as a school child. But then as a first-year graduate student, I read Catherine Drinker Bowen's book, and although in fact the academic reviewers were a little hard on it, as academic reviewers are inclined to be, I thought it was a wonderful book. It inspired me. I've gone back to it over the years, but over the years I've learned more about the Constitutional Convention. I think scholarship on the Constitutional Convention has changed, and I decided that it was perhaps time to take those wonderful bronze statues over there in Signers Hall, and they are perfect likenesses. You'll never see a better rendering of the Founding Fathers than the bronze statues in Signers Hall, but I decided that I really wanted to take those bronze statues and bring them to life, not as mythic figures, but as real men. The title of the book, Plain Honest Men, comes from one of the convention delegates, Gouverneur Morris of Pennsylvania. And Morris was reacting against a tendency that was already apparent within a few months after the convention had adjourned to make these folks larger than life. There are two very important letters that contribute to this. The first was from Thomas Jefferson to John Adams. While the convention was going on, Adams was serving in Paris as ambassador to France, and he wrote Adams and he said, I'm given to understand that an assembly of demigods has gathered in Philadelphia. I actually think that Jefferson meant that somewhat sarcastically, because he wasn't the kind of person to believe in demigods or much in divine inspiration. The other letter is the famous letter from George Washington to the Marquis de Lafayette, written in February of 1788, in which he said he believed it was a standing miracle that the founders could create a constitution so little liable to well-founded objections. And Catherine Drinker Bowen began her book with those words, and then went on to add that the miracles do not happen by accident. They are prayed for. And that was a very compelling notion. But I think, in fact, Gouverneur Morris came closer to the truth when he said that although some have ascribed this Constitution to heavenly origins, I'm inclined to give it a more earthly explanation. I believe that it was the work of plain, honest men. They weren't so plain. They were mostly wealthy, white, privileged 18th century Americans.
And young.
And remarkably young, average age of 44. And you got to remember, Benjamin Franklin at 81 brought that average age way up. So I wanted to tell the story of the making of the Constitution through the eyes and actions and thoughts, not of larger-than-life demigods, but real men. Not 21st century men, mind you, but 18th century men. It's very important to understand them in their historical context. And by the way, I can't resist saying that. So I'm trying, in one sense, to demystify them, but in every way I come away from my years writing this book with greater and greater respect for them. I've frequently joked to my students in my courses, and I know many of them are actually out in the audience, for which I'm very grateful, that if you gave me a choice between the very best 55 members of our current Congress and the 55 guys who were gathered in the assembly room of the Pennsylvania State House, and mind you, there were a few losers among that 55 in the State House, but on average, I'd take the 55 in the State House any day.
Well, now Rick in his book says that he spent 40 years thinking about this book, which, by the way, by my calculation, works out to about a page a month, but we'll leave that go. If you can't hear, do we have a problem?
Can we mic us up a bit? Joe and I have never been accused of failing to project.
Okay, now that email I was going to give you, I can give you now. You want to take that one off?
Can people hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
They seem much happier about that. Is this on yet? Is it on now? Can I just try projecting? Okay. Rick, in the book, talks about how long he's lived with these founders, and he talked about how happy he'd be to take the still not. All right. What do you need?
Joe and I have the same attitude toward technology. It is a highly adversarial one.
Let's try that now. No. I think they still can't hear. Can you hear me? I feel like I'm in a Sprint commercial. There we go.
There we go. You're on.
So of the founders that you lived with for these 40 years, we know you take the best of them, but what about what you view to be the worst of them? And for all of you who haven't read the book yet, I'll say that Rick is pretty hard on Alexander Hamilton, who I grew up at least thinking was one of the great heroes of the convention. And we'll talk a little about talk about Hamilton, but also talk, Rick, about over time, who did you grow to like less and who did you grow to like more?
Okay, fair enough. Well, I know there's Hamilton buffs out there in the audience, so I know I run the risk of provoking some hostile questions later in the program. Hamilton, I think, is deservedly praised for his work as Secretary of the Treasury during the 1790s.